80s and 90s kids. What's something a school teacher did to you that would not fly today? Story 1. I told my biology teacher that I wasn't feeling too well. He said that I didn't look sick, and as punishment made me stand in the corner until I fainted. Something similar happened to me. It was during gym class when I was 10 years old, and I feel wrong when doing high jumps. My arm started hurting and I couldn't even move it without crying. I told my teacher this. He didn't believe me and loudly accused me of lying to get out of class, and I had to stay there. After the class, I had to get help from my classmates to change my clothes, and I cried like a baby, and the teacher still didn't believe me when he came into the locker room to check on us. Yeah, that was a thing. Male teachers checking in on the girls, sometimes even in the showers to make sure we didn't cheat that part. When I got home and told my mom, she took one look and rushed me to the hospital. I had broken my arm. Story 2. In high school, we would sometimes play knee soccer, which was in our wrestling room, wall-to-wall wrestling mats, and was really just handball but on our knees. The PE teacher, football coach, let us play rough since it was an all-male class and we were on our knees and couldn't do too much damage. During the game, 2 of the students were grappling for the ball, and as these things go, one of them accidentally knocked the other a little too aggressively. The kid that got hit, a known jerk of the school, got pissed and stood up and kicked the other kid. The PE teacher, 225 pounds jacked military haircut, stormed over and shoved the kid, who flew about 10 feet before crashing to the ground. The kid got up ready to fight, whoever shoved him, and the teacher had closed the gap and started screaming at him. Then the teacher lectured the entire class about sportsmanship and honor. The teacher never got in any trouble. Story 3. My high school study skills teacher used to A. Throw your book bag over the railing, outside the class to the first floor below if you fell asleep. B. Threw chalkboard erasers at you if you were caught talking during his lectures. C. Got a megaphone in your ear if you fell asleep and didn't notice your book bag tossed. Funny thing is, Mr. Stewart was somehow one of the most liked teachers in school. Circa 1997, I had a teacher that would throw foam balls at students when they fell asleep. A classmate actually woke up in time to catch it. There was a story of a college professor when I was in college. On the first day, he'd walk in with a tennis ball, just kind of tossing it to himself. Everyone figured, okay, stress ball or something, and he just went about his lecture. In the second or third class, someone fell asleep. Professor took that tennis ball and rocketed it at the sleeper, bouncing it off his head. Suddenly, everyone was like, oh, okay, that's what that's for. Better not fall asleep. Next class, when the professor came in, he had a baseball. Story 4. One of my history teachers tied me to my desk in high school. All in good fun, and I was absolutely being a sarcastic little crap, but still not a good idea. I had a band teacher whip a chair across the room, nod at a student, and scream at us to get it right. He was employed at the school after it was suggested that he leave his old school for getting a little too comfortable with some of the girls in his class. Nothing overt or criminal, just uncomfortably close to grooming behavior. And on a lighter note, one of my English teachers smoked a joint in his car every day during his planning period. Same guy had a hall pass that was a sandwich board reading, "I am missing out on a valuable educational experience because I have to tinkle." He also called me a sarcastic little crap, which, again, I totally deserved. Story 5. In 5th grade, I was called to the office at my public school. I was a goody two-shoes, so I had no idea why I was called. So I started tearing up thinking something bad must have happened to my family. Eventually, I was ushered into a room as my 2 best friends left. The principal and 2 other staff members then sat me down and showed me a piece of paper. It was a silly poem I wrote to one of my friends about a good witch who granted wishes by mixing together some mundane ingredients. Apparently, their mother found the poem and complained to the school. Their response was to interview my friends about my religion. They asked stuff like if I drew any weird symbols, and one friend said yes because I always drew the school symbol for Balam Garden, Final Fantasy VIII, on my notebooks. So by the time they got to me, they were basically trying to get me to admit practicing witchcraft at school. Public school. Which I was not. I was at church every Sunday Christian and knew nothing of actual witchcraft, not that it should matter, but they said they could tell by my tears that I knew I did something wrong. They put me in detention for the day in the principal's office and never informed my parents. Ironically, the year prior, I had drawn an angel in art class during some fundraising event, where you could get your kids' art put on merchandise. Right next to me on a file cabinet was a magnet of my angel drawing that the principal who put me in witchcraft jail had bought for herself. Story 6. In 7th grade science class, The teacher walked around with a beaker full of mercury and told us to stick a finger in it to feel how dense it was. Then he gave us each our own penny-sized drop of mercury to play with at our desks, so we could see how it moved. I'm sure we were poisoned that day. Nowadays, if a thermometer breaks, they clear the school. That's really only dangerous if you have an open wound on your finger. If you did it for hours every day, then you go all Mad Hatter, sure. But once in a while is basically harmless. They should bring this back and just have the kids wear latex gloves. It's one of the most gripping demos, and I'm sure it got a lot of kids into science. Story 7. 90s Kid. If we ever had to go somewhere a bit more far and take a bus, our teacher let us go there by ourselves and come with his car. We were 9 or 12 years old, so elementary school in us terms, I guess. He would ask if anyone knew where the place was and made them a leader to take the class there. Edit. Also because the school pays for these trips, so he would give the school's bus card that had like 500 euros loaded into it to someone so we can pay for those kids who didn't have the bus ticket. Story 8. So my mom was maybe not the most observant. I love her to pieces, but yeah. When I was 10, the neighbor's dog bit me, grabbed and shook my hand really badly. I went home and told my mom, who was like, "Oh, it's fine. Let's clean up those puncture wounds." No big deal. Don't tell Dad. My dad was a cop and a mandated reporter. We literally just didn't want the dog to be in trouble. It had never happened before, and that poor baby was so sorry. Turned out he had an ear infection, and when I went to scratch his head, like I'd done a million times before, it hurt him. The neighbor forgot to tell me his ear hurt. It wasn't his fault at all. The next day was Monday, and I tried to tell Mom that my hand was bad, really bad. She said I still had to go to school, and man, when Mrs. Messenger, my 5th grade teacher, saw me, she flipped her crap. She was so upset she was going to call my mom and give her what for and on, and I was like, oh crap, I'm in big trouble now. She marched me down to the office, and I sat near the school secretary while she went into the principal's office and rained all manner of holy hellfire and brimstone on my mom's head, screamed bloody murder at her. She came and picked me up and took me to get an x-ray. I had 6 broken bones in my hand. Oops, can't even see a teacher raising their voice in an email nowadays. That lady saved my pitching hand. Story 9. I had a teacher bring me up to the front of my 5th grade class to show everyone how slovenly I had dressed. I was one of 5 kids and wore thrift store clothes. I wish I could show her how successful I've become and that I now dress much better than she did. I had a teacher who made a point of pulling me up in front of the class to inspect my clothes for dress code violations. She took immense pleasure in pointing out anything I did wrong, including this beyond my control. In one instance, all my jeans tore at the knee at the same time my mom was out of town. She was a seamstress, so she could have repaired them. I stapled them shut, trying my best to hide the tears until they could be repaired. She saw a small bit of a hole, and I had to wear my gym clothes for the day and was sent to the principal office for the period. She didn't do this to anyone else but me, and she did it every single day. Story 10. When students got bullied back then, one of the most common responses from teachers was, "Looks like you need to toughen up." Some teachers seem to encourage bullying. At my son's elementary school, they seem to take bullying way more seriously, and it is not tolerated. In junior high, I was in band, and one of the clarinet players, who was a short girl, wore a denim skirt that was a few inches above the knees. The band teacher made her sit with it between her legs. Proper posture, he claimed. She obviously did not want to sit that way because spreading her legs would mean everyone would be able to see up her skirt. He made her do it anyway. The whole thing felt gross and weird. She was terrified. In high school, one of the teachers always assigned all the pretty girls to the front row and all of the boys to the back. Everyone knew he liked looking up girls' skirts, and it was just talked about like it was some kind of strange but mostly harmless personality trait. On the plus side, in high school, the football coach went out of his way to get one of the poorest kids in school a football scholarship to a small college a few states over. He was like 145 pounds and not very fast, but a really hardworking, smart dude who came from a rough family. Apparently, the high school coach was friends with the college coach. The kid got a scholarship for a year to ride the bench and then took over as equipment manager and got a full ride for an undergrad degree. Can't imagine that happening today. People take college athletics way too seriously, even at the small schools. Story 11, elementary school was particularly traumatizing. One of my teachers refused to let one of my classmates use the bathroom, a bathroom that was in the same room as us. He ended up wetting his pants, and I'll never forget watching it puddle off the chair because of how much he'd been holding it. Instead of sending him to the office to get new clothes, she made him take his pants off inside of the bathroom to hang off a tree outside. He was forced to wait in that bathroom for hours. All the students saw it, and you can probably guess how they reacted toward him. This same teacher refused to let me get medical help for my migraines that I started to have around age 11. She told me I was lying or faking it. And it got so bad that I was forced to switch teachers. It got so bad that I was terrified to ask for help and passed out in class. Needless to say, of course she taught for another few years before finally getting fired. F you, Mrs. Alexander. Story 12. This happened when I was in 4th grade, 1995 or 96. We were taught fractions in our math class, and our teacher assigned us a set of problems from the textbook. Once in my life, I understood the concept really well and solved an additional set of problems, which were meant to be solved in class the next day. Needless to say, my mom was super proud of me when I showed her my work, and she wanted to hear my teacher's feedback the next day. Back then, we had a system where we would submit our notebooks to the teacher at the beginning of the class, and she would call us to her desk, one student at a time, and correct the homework. The next day, when the teacher called out my name, I was excited, ran up to her desk and waited eagerly for some praise. She finished correcting my work and noticed there were additional problems that I'd done. I looked at her beaming, but stopped when I saw her reaction. Her face turned red with anger, and she yelled, "You think you are so smart that you had to do all the problems? I had asked you to solve only the first set right? Why did you solve the other problems?" The whole class went silent. She proceeded to rip apart the pages containing the extra homework, crumpled them into a ball and flung it on my face. Worse, I got a tight slap and got sent out of the class to kneel down. I could feel my ears burning as I sat outside the class, sobbing silently for the rest of the class. I'm pretty sure something like this would never fly in schools today. Story 13. In 6th grade, my teacher had all the kids over to his house for a sleepover. All the kids, every year. It was an annual thing, and none of the parents had a problem with it. This would have been 1991 or so. In 7th grade, there was an ornery old cuss named Mr. Day who taught math. He once lifted me up by my shirt, yelled, and smashed me into the wall because I kicked a garbage can. Only it was the kid walking in front of me. Oh yeah. And he would openly make fun of a Hispanic kid in front of the entire class, mostly white middle school, teaching us that foreigners should be mocked if they are still learning the language. That's just what I remember from 6th or 7th grade. If I uncover any more childhood trauma, I'll be sure to update. Story 14. My father-in-law used to be a school janitor in the 90s. He's a pretty big, meaty man. One day a kid was purposefully throwing trash on the ground in the school. He told the kid to pick it up, and the kid said, "Isn't that your job?" He then told the kid he was going to take a walk and be back in 5 minutes, and if the trash wasn't picked up, he was going to dust the top of the lockers with the kid's head. Kid obviously thought he was bluffing and did not pick up his trash. Not being one for empty treats, he picked up the kid and took a walk up and down the lockers, dusting the top of the lockers with his fro. Supposedly the kid never gave him trouble again, but I can't see him getting away with something like that today. Story 15. In 1993, my 6th grade homeroom teacher organized our class into different kingdoms. I was King Balillo of the Balillo clan. There were like 5 different kingdoms with kings, queens, princes, and princesses, and we all were pitted against each other. My wife's name was Queen BD, which stood for brain damage, and our daughter's name was BDB, baby brain damage. If a married couple both got a 100% on any of her quizzes, she would bake them a tray of brownies that only they were allowed to eat the day after the quizzes were graded. I guess that these things weren't terribly controversial, but still I don't think this sort of thing would fly today. Story 16. In 1982, I was in grade 1 at a Catholic school in Australia. I wouldn't stop playing with the long hair of the girl in front of me during story time. She was okay with this. So my teacher took strips of cards and stapled them around my wrists like cuffs. I remember thinking, cool, now I don't have to do any work. But she took them off once the story was over. The previous year, my older sister wouldn't stop wriggling during story time, so her teacher taped her to the floor. In grade 4, my teacher would sometimes call us pathetic and brought in a dummy and pacifier to make us use if we wouldn't stop talking. He also threatened to bring in a playpen and put it in the middle of the quad for us to sit in if we were going to continue to act like babies. The principal would still give you the belt on your butt or ruler on your palms as the final punishment. It didn't happen often, but it did. The boy who got it the most was always in trouble and had massive anger issues. Looking back, I'm pretty sure he was in an abusive household, but these things weren't really addressed. Story 17. I'm a naturally very cold person, so I wear long sleeves often, even if it's warm, especially inside because fans and such chill me like crazy. My 8th grade teacher suspected I did this because I was cutting myself. She asked me to come to the front of the class during reading time, and in front of everyone gave a little talk about my suspicious sleeves, and then grabbed my sleeves and pushed them up, thinking she would expose my cutting. It was very awkward when there was no cutting, and she had nothing to say, so muttered something about how I probably cut my thighs instead. To this day, I have no idea what she was thinking or trying to achieve. Like, what was the goal if I actually was cutting? Humiliation? I still get angry when I think about it. In this age of mental health awareness, I really don't think this would have gone over well. Story 18. In 3rd grade, the first week of school, I didn't know what day PE was, so I wore a dress on a day we happened to have PE. The thing the PE teacher had us do that day was a sort of obstacle course, and the first step was flipping over a bar. She wanted us to do it backward. Of course, I could not do that in a dress without it flipping up, so I tried to quietly skip that one and get in line for the next. As expected, I got caught. I said I didn't want to flip the bar while wearing a dress. I was made to flip the bar backward, while the whole class watched. I'd already been yelled at in front of them for trying to skip the obstacle, so they were looking at me already, and laughed their butts off when my dress flipped right over my head, exactly as I expected. I didn't wear a dress to school again until 6th grade. Story 19, late 80s and early 90s elementary school. I had one somewhat older teacher who used to throw his slipper at noisy kids. Sometimes he'd hit kids with his slipper if the kids were particularly unruly. He'd also use a cardboard box. When someone was crying, he'd put the box over the kid's head and would say, "There you go, if you're going to cry, do so in the crying box." Then there was this other teacher who'd force kids to wash and rinse their mouth with hand soap if they cursed, because they had a dirty mouth that needed cleaning. She'd also put kids who did stupid things over at the chalkboard and drew big ears above their heads with a text balloon that read, "I'm a donkey." Parents would just ignore it, as they went to the same school when they were kids, in the 50s and 60s, and back then kids were just slapped around or received a beating on the hands or bum with a ruler if the teachers felt the kids deserved it. Story 20. In 7th grade, I had read all of the books we were supposed to be reading that year, and the teacher gave me the tests, and I passed them all, so for the rest of the school year I was allowed to just spend all day reading in the library with his TA for supervision. She was working on her master's thesis about Egyptian archaeology, and I learned about the lesser-known pharaohs and royal lines when she needed to run her research by someone. Basically, I just read every book in the library until school was out. It kind of enters and alters my dreams about school recurring dreams. Story 21. Not me, but a couple of friends of mine. One guy, let's call him Raymond, got in trouble with the elementary school principal. He was always a bit of a troublemaker and did time later in life. The principal came into our grade 4 classroom to talk to the teacher about Raymond. Raymond must have supremely pissed him off because in the middle of the conversation between principal and grade 4 teacher, Raymond got lippy with the principal and the principal snapped. The principal suddenly bent over, grabbed the metal wastepaper basket from next to the teacher's desk, and hurled it across the classroom at Raymond. Raymond was smart and quick and ducked. My other friend, Michael, was not as quick and got the wastepaper basket square in the face. Principal stormed out. The incident was never mentioned again, although fairly soon after that, the principal retired and our grade 4 teacher became principal. Story 22. I remember 2 teachers in my small-town public school trying to preach their fundamentalist Christianity during class time. One was a 7th grade life science teacher, the junior high equivalent of biology, who made sure we knew he didn't believe in evolution. By way of additional illustration, he had 5 kids, all boys, and the first 4 were named Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He never made creationism a required topic on any test, or evolution for that matter, but he definitely left his creationist tracts out for students to read. Another was a world history teacher during my junior year of high school. We were studying the Holocaust, and he asked the class, "Does anybody know what Jews believe?" There were no Jews in our town or in our school, so my classmates didn't commonly know. I gave him my simplistic high schooler level answer. "Well, they don't believe in Jesus." This guy said, "You're right, and I personally don't understand how you couldn't."